The biggest battle we will ever have to face is the battle between you and you. It's the battle of taking your mind to that limit and then breaking through. On the Mindful Experiment podcast, we will share concepts, universal laws, and interviewing individuals who have done just that, who have gone through the dark times and through those moments allowed their light to shine bright. I'm your host, Dr. Vic Manzo, and I want to thank you for listening to the podcast and taking this journey with me as we discover different avenues to break through those limits, expand your reality, and evolve into the person you desire to be. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Vic, and I want to thank you for tuning in and listening to The Mindful Experiment. In this podcast, I had the joy and pleasure to geek out with Nick Jankel. Nick is an award-winning thought leader, author, and professional speaker. He has advised organizations like Number 10 Downing Street, Kellogg's, HSBC, Microsoft, and WWF. He's been invited to speak at prestigious Aspen Ideas Festival, TEDx, and Google headquarters. A former elite scientist and medic, Nick brings the latest science into his work, cognitive, behavioral, emotional, introspective, and blends it with timeless wisdom and uber practical tools for change. He has spent 30 years developing an advanced brain-based transformational methodology, the Switch On Way, which provides a rigorous and proven pathway for unleashing transformation in any area of leadership or life. It has provides individuals and leaders with 90 plus powerful tools and practices to master themselves. He's a highly acclaimed international keynote speaker who has spoken all over the world to audiences as Lego, SAP, Google, Kellogg, Smuckers, Fujitsu, Roke, and an economist summit, amongst many others. A broadcaster, Nick hosted his own BBC TV show, has been featured in the FT and the Sunday Times, and has taught on the MBA programs of LBS, Oxford, Science Po, UCL, and Yale. He has been on BBC World Service, CBS, and Hay House Radio. I'm telling you, this guy is absolutely amazing, a gem to have around. I loved interviewing him and just connecting with him, his wealth and depth of knowledge, philosophy, different avenues of thought, and bringing all the aspects that he takes into with his book, Spiritual Atheist, and so much more, was just a joy to have him on. And this is only part one of a part two series that I had the joy to have. So with no further ado, here is Nick Jankel. So Nick, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much. Really excited.
I'm so excited to have you on. I mean, when I saw the whole term spiritual atheist, it really caught my attention. That's really unique in itself. And I thought that'd be a great opening to the podcast, just to dive in and just share a little bit about what really is and I know this kind of maybe a loaded question, but what is like, where did you come up with the term spiritual atheist? How did that evolve?
Well, I'll tell you a story which, I originally opened the book with, but I took it out in the end, which is the night the book came to me. So the book came to me very quickly. In the space of about 2 hours, I went from having a conversation, which I'll tell you about in a second, to having all the chapters of the book literally downloaded I was, typing on my iPhone and notes. And the chapters only changed. One chapter was added. For the 2 years of writing after that night, only one chapter was added. Nothing was changed. No chapter was changed. And so the conversation I was having was like this. The guy who I was having a conversation with was a very religious man. He's also a soldier. And I'm not a soldier, I should add. I'm kind of not like a soldier or anything. So I'm kind of unsoldierly. And, but we've been put together, actually by my dear and wonderful mother, because she thought him and I would have a connection. So I'm sitting next to this very religious soldier guy. And he's saying, well, what do you do for a living? I said, well, try to explain personal development, leadership development, and then philosophy, wisdom, spiritual teaching. And he's like, well, hold on a minute. So you're spiritual? And I said, yeah, deeply, profoundly guided by a real intense experience of spirituality. He said, well, how can you be spiritual if you're not religious? I'm a spiritual person, but I'm part of a of a very organized religion. In that moment, I went, this is something I need to be able to explain to people, that you can be profoundly religious, profoundly spiritual without having any religion at all. And when I say religion, I also mean even sort of modern day religions like New Age, or even science as a religion. And you can still be really spiritual and really live through that spirituality every day, make decisions from that spirituality, not just kind of having a nice incense burner on your, mantelpiece. And so he could not get his head around this at all. And I was like, boom, that's what I got to write. And I was actually writing another book at the time, which I've just returned to now. And I just had to write this book instead. And so for the last now 3 years, I've been developing this book, publishing this book, marketing this book. And that's a whole other story. But the idea was basically, when you say you're spiritual, not religious, what does that mean you believe? Nothing, anything goes, nothing, what is it? What is it? So one of the cheeky sort of marketing hooks that we originally had for the book was the Bible for the spiritual, not religious. So what does it mean? What do you sign up to when you say spiritual, not religious? And for me, I wanted something much deeper and real and tangible than just a Facebook, click point, for my entire worldview. So that was the night the book came to me, and I've just been following that intuition to write it since.
I love that. And then I've read your book, about 90% of it. And you and I have a very similar beginning or outcome started point. Just the religions were different. Mine was Italian Roman Catholic. I think yours was Judaism, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
And so how did that, because I love because when I was reading it, I was like, man, these are the things I was going through. Holy cow, these are the questions I was asking. Then I saw the different the religions you were talking about. I'm like, yep, I've been through that one. I've studied that one. I studied that one. How did that help propel you though? Because for me, and I'll just share it this way, when I was so hardcore into Italian Roman Catholic, trying to go deeper to find truths and so forth, there came a point where it repelled me, but I was appreciative of the repelling because it helped me open up my mind to other areas. Did you have that kind of an experience?
That's such a beautiful way of saying it. I can now see that's what happened. But at the time, I was just repelled. So I did a bar mitzvah, as you do in the Jewish scenario, and prayer stuff, whatever, Hebrew. And then I joined a sort of program for 13 to 15-year-olds, really studying a bit more depth in the Old Testament and the philosophy and the history. And during that period, I was also kind of awakening as a teenager. I was 13, 14. I was kind of depressed. I was having psychotherapy. My parents divorced when I was very young, blah, 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 a bit of bullying, etc. And so I did go deeper. I was like, rabbis, tell me more about this thing. Where's the juice was what I was basically asking. Where's the bit that's going to salve my broken heart? And there really wasn't any. They couldn't give me any. And they didn't give me any pointers into the mystical side of things, the spiritual side of things. And I just went through a period. I went, oh my God, this stuff is just not helpful. And also rationally, as my mind was growing, doesn't seem very real or true. I'm out. And I went really big out. I was like, boom. And I actually basically self-destructed by, so the group of us who were doing this 13 to 15-year-old program at the synagogue were asked to run a whole service for the congregation. So 500 people, center of London, very beautiful synagogue. And I was chosen to do the sermon, unsurprisingly, because I have a propensity to talk. And in that sermon, I basically said the belief in a sort of father God, just made no sense to me. I brought in Freud, I brought in Marx, and, testament to the Jewish culture. I wasn't there was no fatwa put on my head. I was welcomed back, many years since to have dinners or whatever there, because people appreciate an inquiring mind. But I definitely sort of self-destructed my religious community life in that one sermon.
Wow. I love it. That's definitely repelled you, huh?
I was out. But I mean, you know, I actually had to sort of put up some boundaries up with my family, saying I'm not coming to those events. I'm not coming into that, you know. And now I'm happy to go to synagogue. I'm happy to go to church. I'm happy to go to anywhere where there's any form of prayer, because I can find within it some space for myself to go inside, and I can honor it. But the time I felt I had to really wash the ideology out of my mind so I could think freely for myself.
I love how you bring that up, because that's exactly what happened to me. It was, I had to just fully step away, and I jumped into Buddhism, Hinduism.
Mm-hmm.
I tapped a little bit into Judaism, studied a couple other religions and cultures. And now I can, like, now I sit there and go, okay, where's the good in this? Like,
right.
there is some good. And I always tell people, because I'll be asked too, like, oh, Doc, I know you're very on the spiritual side of things. You're very this way. So I know you don't really practice a religion. I said, well, my religion's nature. So and I'm like, but at the same token, I'm like, but yeah, I go, but the religion has a place. And I always tell people, if this is what you want to side to and say, this is what your faith is and what you want to believe in, I go, if it makes you a better person, go with it. Like, let it, you know, there's good in there. There are some good. But yeah, I love how you bring that up.
I think there's a lot of good.
Yeah.
The challenge becomes when people become dogmatic about their ideology and attempt to push it on other people. And for me, the quintessential religious truth, which is actually the mystical truth of our oneness, of our interconnection, of our being in the world together as one, as nature, as the philosopher Spinoza said, God or nature, doesn't matter what you call it, it's the one thing.
Yes.
As soon as that starts getting covered up in lots of rules that then try to get projected onto you and what you can do and what you can't do. So I've had people, since this book was published, I've had people take the time to go onto my website, find the contact page, write out the contact form, and tell me I'm going to hell. All that effort because of that ideology. And that's where it becomes challenging. That's the atheist part of me that says, you know, we don't do ideology. In the book, I talk about principles, and I actually ended up writing, for anyone who reads the book, there's a freebie afterwards to download, which is a manifesto, if you like, of what a spiritual atheist could believe in, but they're principles, not rules. So if someone wants to reinterpret them and make them more appropriate for your country or your culture or your gender, knock yourself out. You know, but they're not rules. And as soon as you have rules try and become eternal, and the world's changing so quickly, nothing's really forever. You know, nothing's eternal. You can't say 2,000 years ago in the Middle East that these rules are now going to be really appropriate in, you know, a Canadian winter, or in Mexico, or in the climate change world of 2050. Just impossible.
Yes. I couldn't agree with you more with that. Yeah, and it's one of those things. And just for the listeners, so because when you hear the word atheist, that means, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it more, atheist is just a term that states that you don't believe in a God per se, or is it just in your realm, it's more of that the godly figure that we've all been taught through religion?
Great question. So in the book, I set up two forms of atheism. Obviously, spiritual atheism, which is the form that I'm, marshalling, discussing, thinking about. And then I talk about this other form of atheism I call materialist atheism.
Yes.
Which is where atheism has become now in the modern world, you know, in London and New York and I don't know, Chicago and Paris. It's an ideology of its own. So for me, atheism itself just means, whether you're spiritual or otherwise, atheism itself just means you don't believe in a personal God, like a being that has agency and wants stuff for you and talks to you as a human talks to a human, and has a priesthood who say they're more close to this God than you are, and have some rules for you, and there's an ideology or a revealed book, which is the word of this personal God. Mm-hmm. So that for me is where I can't get involved in that at all. That's still the same as when I was 15. What I have realized is atheism overstepped its mark, and it went from saying there is no personal God to saying essentially anything that science can't prove and logic can't prove doesn't exist. It's a made up, it's bullshit, it's nonsense. And that's where I went myself in my 20s, and it ended up bringing me to my knees and depression and fibromyalgia and all these other things, because that is fundamentally not accurate, that form of atheism, which is really very powerful in the circles that I'm involved in. These big city atheism is very aggressive towards spirituality.
Gotcha.
And that, I think, you chuck out the baby with the bathwater, and that baby is the baby of all life's greatest experiences: love, peace, connection, relationships, collaboration, creativity. And if you throw away that baby, then you've thrown away everything. And then you wonder why there's depression everywhere and anxiety everywhere and businesses that aren't sustainable and all that sort of stuff.
No, it's so true. I mean, I have a couple friends that are atheists, but they're very all about, everything is dependent upon me and what I want to do. And I've had discussions and I'm like, do you believe there's a greater force, a greater power, something that unifies us all together, where we come from, where we stem from? And it's interesting. They'll always, at least I'm speaking only for them. He goes like, I know some people will be listening, be like, but that's not what I believe in atheism. And I don't want to get into all that. So, but they'll be like, I know there's something greater. And they go, I know that within my bones and in my soul, but they just say that everything is dependent on me and not another figure that's going to condemn me if I don't follow a certain way or, do this or do that. I'm freer than what has been projected upon how they were raised, and they were raised through religion also very strongly. And I just find it fascinating. So when you brought that up, I was like, when you said the type of atheism leans more to the spiritual side of things, I was like, yeah, I could totally, I see that with some, in some realms of where, in my reality, I guess you want to call it, my friends that I have. So,
well, in many ways, I wrote the book for those kind of people initially. That was the first sort of energy, which is, I have lots of people I know, and I travel around the world and I do keynotes all over the place, and I meet so many people. And the way I would put it is this: their heart feels this force, this interconnected field of consciousness, which we call love. The heart feels it. The mind doesn't know it and can't know it, and therefore rejects it.
Yep.
And then they're stuck between these two places. They got to, they hold their newborn baby. They go walk up a mountain. They eat amazing Chicago pizza, etc., and they feel, oh my God, this is joy, this is bliss, this is love, this is connection. But then the logical mind doesn't understand that because it hasn't been given a way to understand it. And this book initially was like, we've got to give these minds a way to allow the hearts to also have a voice in people's mind, in people's beings, in people's lives. But as I wrote it, I also thought, well, another place where this book is really powerful is if you're spiritual, not religious, if you kind of know that you definitely believe in something, but you don't know what, and you don't know how it fits with your love of science and your love of reason and your love of all the great things that our minds have brought the world, that too. So it's really bringing together these two worlds. That's the core of my work, is how do you bring together what your heart feels and what your mind knows? And I actually, towards the end of the writing of the book, I had a number of epiphanies. And actually, for me, book writing is really a form of practice. Apologies for that. And I had this epiphany, which is, not only is spirituality absolutely aligned with science, so therefore there's no war between, religion and science are at war, but science and spirituality don't have to be.
No.
And then I went a step further and realized that if in my language, spirituality is the study of our inner experience, our subjective interior experience, and science is the study of our exterior molecules, matter, then how can you live in the world without knowing both together and bringing them both together within you? How can you make a decision about your health, for example, without both understanding the latest neuroscience, the latest pharmacology, the latest studies of twins for 50 years telling you what is really good and bad, but not just relying on that, also then tapping into your own meditational experience, your contemplation, your intuition, and going, so this is the science, this is what I feel, and this is what I'm going to do about it. So that comes up with things like everything from immunizations to cancer treatments to, there's a bit in the book which 3 people have asked me about recently, circumcision, all these decisions we have to make. you can't make them with either science or spirituality alone. You have to bring them together and make sense of it together within you. And then we become whole again because we have a mind that likes to study the outside world, and we have a heart that likes to experience the inside world. So that was kind of, for me, a massive revelation. Was don't just fit together. We need them to come together within us to get through the challenges of the world today.
No, totally. I totally agree with you there. And I think that can help solve a lot of the modern great problems in society. And even from just my background in chiropractic, I mean, you're speaking of left brain, right brain, right? Left brain is logical, wants to be predictive, wants to see, makes certain outcomes and know how it goes. It compartmentalizes, deducts things. And then you have right brain, which is all intuition and heart center. It's the connection to the spiritual side of things. And so in the work I do, it's all about balancing the brain in what we call hemispheric synchronicity. And once you get there, now you're in a balanced, more elevated state, a higher conscious level, higher planes, and you can bring both worlds together. And so I love how you shared that, because I'm like, yep, that's a universal principle, what we talk about in chiropractic, and how we do that in that sense. And I agree with you altogether. I mean, we have to, I think what we happen in society, and I'm assuming, where you're at in Chicago and all that and all areas, it's all the common things in the modern society is we've trusted too much and let logic and left brain take us too far. Right. And I know you will agree on that. And it's one of those things where, and I love in your book, you talk about like bringing the other side into the table and bringing that into the conversation, into the equation to really have a better experience.
Yeah. I believe that the secret to life is to harmonize two things within us. So, and they kind of seem to be all echoes of the same thing. So for me in the book, I talk about spirituality being essentially about consciousness, and science being about matter. And we are both material beings and conscious beings. And so the work of philosophy, the work of meditation, the work of life is to bring them together. But then you see them again in other ways. So then you see creativity versus getting stuff done, right? Mm-hmm. Two parts of us. No business, no career can work without both of them working together, right? And if you do too much getting stuff done and not enough creativity, you end up dry and bored and overwhelmed. Too much creativity, not enough getting stuff done, and you're an artist who's churning out amazing stuff, but no one's buying it. So you're living in poverty. So, neither of those are particularly great. So, and then you talk about business. Again, the same tension between profit and purpose, changing the world, making some money so I can continue to pay the bills. So there's this seam running through from the smallest to the biggest parts of our being, which for me are what is this spiritual atheist stuff, and I could have called the book Mind and Matter. I could have called it Consciousness and Science. I could have called it many different things that spoke to those two parts of us. I could have called it Intuition and Instinct. But I chose spiritual atheist because it sort of put me out into a conversation with a bit of edge, with a bit of pizzazz. Although I have to say it's definitely been a challenging book to bring to the world, because the atheists are like, oh, spirituality, you're just a woo-woo wacko job. Yeah. We don't believe in you. We don't trust you anymore. We think you're nuts. And then the spiritual people are like, oh, atheist, you heartless, soulless bastard. And it's really, and the whole point is what I'm saying is we've got to come together. We've got to bring it together. And it's definitely been uncomfortable.
And that's why I loved your title of your book so much, especially when I started to look at it and everything. I was just like, you got me even curious. I was like, okay, spiritual and atheist. I'm like, all right, this is going to be an interesting one. Let me see where he's going first before I let my wheels start turning.
Right.
Right. I love how you did.
I'm glad you waited.
Yes, I usually do for the most part. I've learned over time. But it's even cool. I mean, even like, being on the science side, you talked about that a lot. Can someone who is like really deep in science, like, they just study all the new quantum physics stuff out there and all this new, because I had a guy I was interviewing and he is like massively into the quantum physics side. But what's cool though, is he's starting to open up now to spirituality because of what's coming out with it. But can they be a spiritual atheist?
Yes, definitely. I'm like, bring it. It's the church of nobody. It's like, there's no priest here. You do what you want to be. I'm just calling it something that kind of works. But we can change the name. I'm like, there's no one's branding this. Obviously I'd like to sell some books. But it's a broad church. I think the key for me always comes down to some form of extremism and absolutism.
Gotcha.
And that would include spiritual atheists who say, well, this is the only answer. That would be, for me, dogmatic. It's a work in progress. It's an evolution. It's something that we can engage with, but, it's definitely not mine. So I'll speak about my relationship with my wife, actually, because this is interesting, where we are on the edges of our capacity. So she comes from California. She's much more comfortable than I have been with being a kind of quite sort of new age alternative in her everything.
Mm-hmm.
And she believes so for example, this is where one of the crunch points. So to a traditional atheist scientist, if someone said, well, I get, intuition or a sense of guidance within me, they'd be like, that is rubbish. That's just nonsense. There's nothing there. To a new age person, would be, oh, yeah, that's your spirit guide or whatever, saying what you say. And my wife definitely believes she has spirit guides. But me, in this right in the middle place, I come from the place as a teaching place to say intuition is key. We need to have intuition to make decisions. We need something internally, not just reason and data. We need something else. We need emotional connectivity that comes from quietness and listening. If my wife wants to call that a spirit guide, if you want to call it the voice of God, if you want to call it whatever you want to call it, go ahead, knock yourself out. What's important is to know that it's important and we need it to make decisions. And that's something that I think even the greatest scientists realize as part of their science has been intuition, has been following dots, has been curiosity and can't quite tell, or a hunch. And to deny that would be crazy. And that's kind of where the territory kind of gets, just for one example, where the territory between hardcore scientist, hardcore new ager, and me in the middle trying to say, listen, it doesn't really matter what we call it, but we've got to learn how to have more of it. I'm quite practical in my work. I call myself sometimes a practical philosopher. Philosophy is something you practice as a way of life. It's not something you do or read.
Love that. No, it's totally true. And I think sometimes we do get caught up, especially in the new age, because I was on that realm of things at one point, and how to label this, and this is what this means, and this is who you're talking to here, and this is that, and this. And then I kind of got away, and it's more of like how you say it. I'm like, it's your intuition. Whatever. Yeah, if it's a spirit guide talking to you, okay, great. If it's your guardian angel, if it's Jesus, Buddha, God, whoever, I mean, whatever, if that fulfills you, so be it. But at the end of the day, it's just knowing how to tap into it that really matters.
Yeah, and how to know when it's not your intuition. It's
exactly
your anger or your frustration. If you're like going, I've got to call this motherfucker kind of thing. Excuse my French.
Oh no, you're fine.
That is not intuition, people. That is the voice of your anger being really loud, trying to pretend it's a guidance. It's not guidance. In fact, don't do it. Don't call them until you're calm. Don't email. All those kind of things. But if you get this quiet sense that something needs to be done by you and doesn't go away, and it's kind of, it's really, the words break down because it's such a liquid experience internally.
Yes.
But we all know when we get it, and we can practice it. I do believe we can get muscle in discerning intuition. Because also it's very interesting when you, what's the word? Obey it. That's an interesting word to use. When you align with your own intuition, it seems to make things better. Just, stuff seems to happen that makes things better.
Yes.
I get a sense to call that person. I'm like, I call them, and then it sort of seems to lead to what I call more thriving and less suffering. And that's what, maybe we had to start thinking, well, what is intuition? Maybe it's the voice of the infinitely wise universe guiding us to do something that will help that universe, which we're part of, move towards thriving, wholeness, whatever you want to call it.
No, totally. And I always tell people too, like when you tap into your intuition, you're going into a universe, like in chiropractic, we call it universal intelligence, but it's right. this vastness of all knowing, all that is. And it's like, it knows better. you know.
Exactly. It knows better.
And I think there's a shift happening. There's this great awareness, and I just, you know, let me know if you agree. But it's one of those things where people are starting to they're getting so logical, stuck in that way, letting that drive them, that they're basically burning themselves up, getting depressed. I mean, mental illness is the #1 condition in the world right now.
Exactly.
And I always tell people it's one of the biggest issues. We're when you get too left brain or too logical or too compartmentalized, we gray life. We take the color out.
Right. And I had that myself. In fact, you just used what I was 20 something and I didn't know I was depressed, but that's what it was. And someone said, well, why, how can you describe what it's feeling? I said, well, it's like being at imagine like a Disney, Beauty and the Beast ball, everyone dancing around and chandeliers are sparkling, but all the colors come out. So it's all still happening, but there's no color in it for me. It's like a black and white movie, and there's no sparkle. And I believe depression, and I'm sure that this aligns with the chiropractic way. All our illnesses, mental or physical, and there's components of both in every illness, right? Mental and physical, are genius signs that something isn't right in the system. There's nothing wrong with depression. It's actually amazing because it says to you, hello, there's some stuff deep within which you're not aligned with, and there's some stuff you're carrying around you don't need to carry around anymore. But what we do in the modern world is we don't allow that interior consciousness, that what you talked about, universal intelligence. We don't know how to bring that in. So we just try and kill depression with drugs or CBT, which sort of manages it for a bit, if you're lucky. Rather than going deep in and going, wow, I feel disconnected from the universe, from nature. No wonder I'm depressed. Or, as you said, depression is the #1 burden on global health. Anxiety is the fastest growing illness in teenagers.
Oh, massively.
It's just like, oh my God, it's so depressing that we're creating a generation of teenagers who are already, they don't even wait until their 20s to be depressed and anxious. They're depressed at 14 because we've taken out all the color and we're just saying the only thing that's important is this test, this grade, this application to this college. And now we're also going to add some digital bullying just to, really mix things up a bit. And so we need even more to teach our kids how to feel connected inside so they don't need exam results or other people's approval to feel whole and complete. And if we don't do that, we're going to end up with epidemic. It's almost an epidemic right now, mental ill health. I would say it's going to get to a point when almost everyone who doesn't have a wisdom practice is going to be in some way sick.
Oh, it's scary to even get into because like depression rises 20% every year, which is crazy. Right. And then you have anxiety. I love how you brought that up because we're seeing it in younger and younger and younger.
Right.
7 and 8 year olds, 5-year-olds having anxiety, and we're just, this is your brain is not even fully logical yet. You should be expressive and intuitive. You're in the theta state brainwave for the most part. Why are you even there? It's not right.
I've got my youngest son is 6, and he's going through that sort of 6-7 transition developmental stage. He spends almost all his time in the sort of magical lands of his imagination.
Love it.
We have him in a school that we started ourselves that's aligned with philosophy. Because in England, in this year that he's in at school, which is year 2, which would probably be year 2 in the US or grade 3.
Yep.
They have a big exam at the end of the year. It's the first major exam of for the kids around reading and writing. What person invented a test, a national test, for a child that should be spending most of their time moving, laughing, playing, learning, connecting? It's madness. And then we wonder why we've got the situation we've got. So, I'm hoping part of, as I'm sure with your work, right? I don't like it that people come to my work because they're so suffering and nothing else has worked. That's when I used to do a lot of coaching. Generally, people have had therapy, they've gone this, that, and the other, and they haven't found the solution. They come to me. So that I don't like that situation because what I've learned is that the more you do preventative medicine for yourself, the less crises you have and the less breakdowns you have.
Oh, massively.
And that's, if you're listening to this now, if you haven't had a burnout or a breakdown or a big physical illness or ME or PTSD or any of these things, start the work now before life starts to impinge on you, because it's much easier to do when you're not in crisis and you're not de-resourced, and have nothing left to engage with transformation with.
So true. And it's just, you say it so wonderfully with that, because it is one of those things where if we don't, and that's the other thing, we're a very reactive society. And if we need to get away from that.
Exactly.
And even with kids, like, here's another thing, I don't know if you know, but like boys, actually development a little slower than women. And we know this from a physical side, right? Women, girls will grow, they get taller first before boys do. They fully mature at 19. Boys are around 21, hopefully. Just because I know when I was a boy, I'm like 21, give or take. But even like like you mentioned the test you guys did for the boys to take at like 7 years old, right? 6, 7 years old.
Yeah.
And it has reading in there. Yeah. Most boys are not going to be able to do well on that, because their brain hasn't developed enough to be ready to take on reading like a girl can at that age.
Yeah, my son's only just reading like 3 or 4 letter words, and it's difficult each time. He has to he has to effort each time.
Yeah.
And, it's worried me a little bit. I won't deny it. My wife and I have spent many an hour, just thinking about it. Do we need to support him and whatever? But the last thing we want is him to be tested and then labeled. Because, his brain is, you can see it's just not in the game of reading right now. Not when you can go on an adventure and run, just not interested, basically, just not interested.
And it's because it's not developed there yet. And it's normal. That's very normal, right? Because in America, go ahead.
No, you can.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say, no, it's even in the States, it's like that, where we're testing these kids, 6, 7, they can't read. We have to, we got to test and see this. And next thing you know, they're getting labels, and it's just like, hold up, give them a year or two, and let's have them go back to that. And you're gonna see, wow, they're like girls now. They're caught up. They can read. They can do this. They can take it on that way.
And so, a couple of things just to pull out of that is the importance of developmental stage in education, but also in our own journeys. There is a developmental journey for human beings. There's a transformational journey where our brain kicks in at certain times and does certain things, and then we get access to new capacities. And then when you're in your adult time, you can then start to develop, without the brain having to change, because you're going through adolescence, you can change your brain by engaging in new forms of consciousness. So there's a developmental journey in life, and to avoid that, to pretend it isn't there, is one of the great challenges of some of the sort of cultural postmodernism and identity politics stuff that we're seeing at the moment. This denial of what I call a creative hierarchy. That a 35-year-old who's done 10 years of meditation is going to have a different level of consciousness from a 16-year-old, and that's just fine. I mean, they're better or worse; it's just different. But the other thing you've got with this crazy world with all this testing but this same the focus on profit, whatever, it's the atheist part, it's the science part, thinking it can play and tell the spiritual part of us what to do. In the book, I call this one of the great British philosophers, David Hume, called this the is to ought fallacy. And what that means is science is great at saying you what is. You can measure, let's say you measure 1,000 kids with their reading at age 7, and there'll be an average, right, of how many words or reading age or whatever. Let's say you do it with boys. That's great. That's what science can tell you. What it doesn't tell you is what should be happening. It doesn't tell you what ought to happen. It just tells you what is. And the problem we've got at the moment in the world, one of the problems is because there's no belief, because we took religion out of the public sphere, there's nothing to replace it. There's nothing moral or conscious to replace it. So people now say, well, let's just get the evidence. What's the right reading for my son? Well, there isn't one, because guess what? Your son's a biological organism, not an algorithm, and you can't code it to work in a certain way. It's going on its own journey, You can give it the right materials and culture and conditions and support, and your child will be different from any other child. And don't bring science in and say that's what your child should read or should weigh or should, look like, because it's impossible. As David Hume said, it's impossible to go from what is science to what should be, which is morality, spirituality, consciousness, ethics, all that kind of stuff. And that's really one of the most important places we've got in the world, is the overreach of science into matters of conscience.
Totally. I love the way you express it. I couldn't agree more with you on that. It is one of those things. I wanted to tie back to the book on something. I mentioned this earlier because when I was reading your book, I could tell there was a massive shift that happened to you. I just felt it through the book. I'm hoping that's what I felt, and I wasn't projecting. I even commend you for the plane rides in Africa you took. I was like, there's no way I would ever have gone on those types of planes. But anyway, that's a whole nother story. What happened in Africa? What was the biggest thing that kind of like shifted you to get you to go tune deeply in and all that stuff? What happened there?
So, just to give a bit of context, I was very lucky to be condemned to spend a year in rural Africa in Zimbabwe for my 18th year of my 18th birthday. So, and I was teaching, and ironically, I was teaching science. And as I say it, I went out to Africa, a spoilt North London Jew. It's like a Jewish prince, not as bad as maybe some, but definitely spoilt. Cool, into sort of London-y things, wearing the right clothes and whatever. But also miserable and kind of depressed and not very happy with myself and bullied and whatever. And the first 6 months of being in Africa was brutal for me. It was so inconvenient. Uncomfortable and inconvenient. No toilets, no electric lights, just a paraffin lamp, sleeping on the floor, toilets where you go outside and there's a hole in the ground covered in flies and mosquitoes. So, this is not living the dream for most people's vacation ideas. And I resisted it. I was like, this just sucks. The school sucks. No one listens to me. I can't teach. No one give me any teaching training. So I was just basically rubbish at my job as well. A lot of the kids were older than me. No one really cared what I had to say. And every weekend I would try and get out away from the village. As there was one bus that left at 3 p.m. So I used to slightly sneak out from school just before the school day broke up. I couldn't leave till the next day. And I'd jump on the bus down this sandy road for an hour to a local town and then onwards to the city. And I would go and hang out with other Westerners. And then about 6 months in, I just I don't know what happened. I don't know whether it just had seeped out on me, the sort of African style. People were so kind to me, the other teachers, and so welcoming and so innocent and naive. And there was none of this cynicism that I'd been used to. And so I started staying around the village more often and staying the weekends. And I would go with the kids to when they played football, soccer, at other schools. We'd all jump into the back of a massive flatbed lorry, literally 50 kids and 3 teachers. And then we'd jump, bobble along these track roads for 2 hours, play a game of football and come back. But in those moments, felt like I started becoming part of the culture. And the African culture is so different to Western culture. There's this philosophy, the really important philosophy that Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela spent a lot of time talking about, called Ubuntu, which basically means you and I only exist because of each other, for want of a better word.
Yes, love that.
Which is very different from the Western Anglo-Saxon idea, which is, I think, therefore I am. I am an individual because I think. And I'm just me. And I want to own things and be myself and have my own life, the best life, etc., etc. And this philosophy, I didn't know the philosophy at that point, I should add, just felt this sense of communion, togetherness, being in the world together. We'd have feasts. They would, slaughter a chicken just for me. And I felt accepted and dare I say loved. Towards the end of the year, and it really changed me. As I say in the book, it wasn't enough to fully heal all my wounding, but it was definitely a very important opening to other forms of thinking other than Western thinking, other philosophies, other practices, and also just the power of traveling to other countries to realize just how crazy we are in ours.
So that's what I agree. You did it so well explaining in the book. And I just was like, as I was reading this, I was like, this is it. I felt like that was the pivotal moment of everything started to shift and change.
Yeah, it was definitely a massive opening for me. I didn't still have the tools I needed to really get my way out. And there would be more breakdowns ahead, and there'd be more, Prozac, antidepressants ahead and that stuff, and panic attacks. But definitely something shifted in me that it took me a long time to get back to. And it was around that time I also started getting into the dance music scene and parties and festivals. And that was also another big part of my life. I didn't know what was happening, but, when I was on a dance floor with 1,000 people listening to electronic music, just like I'd been in a party in Africa with the drums beating, something shifted in me. I would now look back at that and say that was ecstatic states, states of union. But I didn't know that at the time.
That's awesome. Do you practice any ecstatic dance now?
I do. My wife and I run an ecstatic dance experience. We take it on tour. And we always have an ecstatic dance experience in the middle night of our 3-day transformational workshop, where we get, big sound system, amazing music. And we take people on the journey of embodying the breakthroughs they've had through the workshop. And it's for people who haven't had them yet, helping them have more, helping them have a breakthrough.
I love that. It's a powerful thing to do. I did that, but like 10 years ago, I got exposed to that. And it was, I love dancing. I've danced all my life, but it's just cool to be able to do it in a different realm and let the music take you over. And it's like, wait a minute, this is what I get when I dance anyhow, but it's just a little different. This is cool.
Doing it with other people who are also doing it from a intentional place is very powerful. And doing it sober with the view to releasing and restoring and rejuvenating is really a beautiful practice.
Yes.
And as I talk about in the book in more detail, for me, we basically have two major choices for how to have reconnection experiences during the average day. One would be meditative, where we quieten down and it's very cool and quiet and blue. And I always think of sort of Zen rivers in China and this sort of blue mist of calm and quietness.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and that sort of cools the ego down. So it's not so chatty. The other way is ecstatic, where we almost warm everything up to such a degree. It's hot and red and steamy. I always think of India in these moments, the red earth of India, and we sort of burn off the ego in those moments. And we have these two tools, and whether it's in a monastery, whether it's in your living room, whether it's playing with your kids, which is can be a form of ecstatic play, as long as you lose yourself in it.
Yes.
And I mean the self as in the small, little, limited, separate, needy self. We lose that in these practices, and we discover what I would call the big self, which is where your big self and my big self are somehow connected together.
I love it. And you made a great point. It's all about losing yourself in the process.
Yeah.
Kids do that very well for us as adults when we play.
They really do. If we can be present with them enough to really go where they want to go.
Exactly. I mean, I remember in a neuro class I was talking about, it was one of my pediatric training, and we talked about the instructor was saying how there is something that happens when you look at a child. It actually, when you get present and look at a child, they actually help you heal your inner child. And I was like, hold up. Is that why I like working with kids a lot? Hold on. Let me think about this for a second. And once that came in my mind, as always, like anything, I will take it and go, let me just see how this plays out. And it's fascinating. There's definitely a lot of truth to that. And as you said, playing with kids, they can really get you to lose yourself and all that. So it's really a great healing tool. So that's good stuff. I like to hear that.
Definitely.
I got a couple minutes here before we got to wind down, but who did you end up, like, who was the book for? I think from chatting with you, I already kind of have an idea, but for the listeners, I was asked this question one time ago and I was like, man, that's such a great question. And of course, anytime I hear a great question, I want to ask it then. So when you were writing this book, who was it for?
I mean, anyone who really wants to have an integrated whole life philosophy from which to live life. And that's really the core of all my work is you can't really make decisions. You can't really live life without a sense of what you're basing your decisions on, what beliefs, what assumptions, what moods, what emotions. And so all my books, all my work is about saying, well, take some time with that. Consider how you believe and what you believe. Don't just believe what your parents believe or what advertising tells you, or what your teacher told you, or what you thought you should do when you were 15 and bullied at school or humiliated. You've got to find out for yourself, right? And so the book is really partly a journey through my version of that to hopefully inspire others to go deep into other areas of their life. But I hope that by the end of it, people will have a sense of what a coherent, integrated life philosophy could be like, that welcomes spirituality as much as science, and starts to see where they fit together and hopefully fit together in your life specifically. So that's kind of really who it's for. But this kind of spiritual, not religious thing is really where I land it. It's what does that mean? If you say you're spiritual, not religious, or you feel there's something bigger, what do you mean by that? And how does it change you? And how does it affect you? And why is it useful? And why is it good? And what are you going to teach your kids? And what are you going to teach other people's kids? What are you going to tell your wife or your husband about this, or your boyfriend or the person you're dating? And, the book is deep. It's rigorous, but it's also super accessible. And there's a glossary of philosophy and wisdom terms at the back, which I took a lot of time on. Because I studied philosophy myself. I studied science and philosophy, and I still had no idea what all the isms were. I was like, no wonder we're confused. And so, if you want to deep dive into wisdoms and science and how they all work and how they work together, that's what the book's about.
I love it. So how can people get a hold of you? Because I'm going to definitely have you back on. I have way more questions to ask, and we didn't even go deep into the book like I wanted to, and that's okay. That's why there's always a part 2 we can make for this, and we'll make it happen. But how can people get contact with you? So
easiest way is to go to the center, which is the website, and then from there you can get to Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn. You can see our leadership programs, my keynotes, my personal development stuff. And the website is switchonnow.com. And there's just a little added extra. There's a link at the top called Inspiration. And on that, there's a bunch of free stuff to download. There's maps of conscious leadership. There's meditations that I developed for the BBC. There's some samples of books. There's a whole bunch of things that are free. And then you also get informed of stuff. But I'm on Medium. If you read Medium, I'm on Huffington Post, Twitter, all that sort of all those usual things. But switchonnow.com is the easiest. And if you want to get the book, I would probably go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble kind of thing, because we don't present the book particularly easily on the website, which is something for me to work on.
I love it.
So Spiritual Atheist, and make sure you get the second edition. It's got a lot more in it, and it's got that glossary at the end.
Nice. And this will be on the show notes, guys, but definitely check out the book. It's a great book. Like I said, I've read about 90% of it, and we're going to definitely have Nick back on so I could dive deeper and discuss more about the book, because it's really a good one. Highly recommend and endorse it. Nick, I want to thank you for being on. This was a pleasure. We didn't get to everything, but I know we're going to.
I'd love to get more into healing with you and talk about what we've learned about healing and how that works up into leadership and entrepreneurship and things. There's some really powerful topics for me about living this stuff in practice.
Let's do it. So we'll definitely set up a time for that. But again, thank you for being on. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. For past shows, please visit www.empoweryourreality.com. I hope this show inspired you and added to your life to help you on the journey to rediscover who you really are. To connect with us on Facebook, please visit www.facebook.com/Dr. Vic Manzo. Check us out on Twitter. The handle is Dr. Vic21. Follow us on Instagram, www.instagram.com/Dr. Vic Manzo. If you were inspired by the podcast, pay it forward by sharing it with someone who you know can benefit from it. Thank you again for listening to the Mindful Experiment podcast, sharing paths to help you rediscover your infinite potential.